Well, hello again. This is Dr. Sam. And as I told you last week, because of this interview's considerable importance in worthwhile content, I've split the interview into two parts. You saw the first part last week. Now, with part two, Dr. George Hruby will continue his discussion. Let's remember Dr. Hruby is a well-published researcher, longtime university professor, and in this segment, he'll talk about his video, What the Phonics is a Science of Reading. He'll also continue his analysis of what I've come to call the social media version of Science of Reading. I will be this week posting a blog around this video, as I always do. So thank you so much for your interest. As always, this is Dr. Sam. I'll be signing off and turning things over to the interview in just a second. Please remember, I'm a centrist. I take flack from all sides. Remember also that I advocate for using the best research-based things from all sides. And I'm looking forward to the day when there are no sides, when we finally find the common ground in all these literacy issues. So thanks for following the blog. And now let's have a look at what Dr. Hruby has to say in part two. Well, actually, you've covered some of the ground I was going to cover next, but what I might do here is just talk about both of the things that I was going to talk about next, and that is your video, What the Phonics is the Science of Reading, and the ideas from that, and the author that you just recently co-authored about legislating phonics and settled science or political polemics. So I'm just thinking anything you want to address out of those two things. I'd be
Well,
interested.
the 6-minute video, What the Phonics is the Science of Reading, was actually done as a warm-up piece for the Literacy Research Association conference of 2020, because that was done virtually, right, because of the pandemic. Normally it would be live and you'd get up and you'd have 3 papers and you'd each hold forth for 20 minutes or so, and then you'd have question and answers at the end of the session. But they had to do it online, so they said, well, because of our technical limitations, the video can't be more than 6 minutes. And I knew what everyone was going to do. They were going to have a PowerPoint precis in bullets, and they were going to read the bullets, right, as if you couldn't read them for yourself. I said, oh, I can't stand that. So I did a rather flamboyant Ken Burns styled visual montage and of this, and I'm poking fun, but I'm not poking fun at science. I mean, the neuroscience of reading has been my focus. The philosophy of science has been one of my foundations for my work. I take science very seriously, and I don't take kindly to marketers using it glibly without any idea what they're talking about, and particularly to push very lopsided approaches to reading instructions simply because it's the most lucrative thing that they can do for the people who are paying their rent. I don't think that's, we get into I'm all for making money, don't get me wrong, but we get into these things where large corporate concerns that are so distended and so far away from the end users, which in this case is school children, our children, that they don't think about the impact, the negative impact that might be had. And they'll even go so far as to fund research that's a little bit fishy. And that's how Big Pharma gave us the opioid crisis. It's how big tobacco gave us the lung cancer crisis. It's how big gas gave us the leaded pollution crisis. And you got to wonder. I mean, I'm sorry, God bless them, but New York financiers and Silicon Valley venture capitalists do not stay awake at night worrying about how young children learn their phonics. They don't know or care. What they care about is what's going to get most sales, most profits. And that's what they're pushing. And they're also pushing an agenda on behalf of fully online education in the schools. And the profits there are not just selling a online activity focused product. It's also, and the fact that there's no print costs or storage cost or transportation cost, obviously that's a great bonus to doing things online. It's also the fact that the schools no longer own these materials. They lease them on a per semester or per use basis. You know, the assessments are incredibly lucrative in that fashion. You look at the map test, that's given 3 times a year instead of just at the end. Well, that's good. And now they're promoting it as something that can be used as a screener at the beginning and as a summative assessment at the end. So five tests in one. And, you know, so that's fine, but is this really going to be the best thing for the kids? And the other way in which, of course, it's lucrative is all of the data that's being scraped and vacuumed up from the student use of the product on their digital platforms, keystroke by keystroke, eye glance by eye glance, pause by pause. This is a massive invasion of students and families' privacy, and I don't see any permission slips involved here. So it's they're appropriating control of the instruction from the teacher. They're appropriating control of the schools from the local community. They're appropriating control of the curriculum from the state. I don't think the legislators realize this yet. So you talk about the privatization of public schools. This is how we're doing it.
Okay. Oh, wow. Well, I think I'm going to, well, now I'm having my little problems here. I want to turn back to the gallery. There we are. Okay. I'm going to ask my very last question, and I know you know I'm known as someone advocating for a centrist position around literacy issues, and that means drawing on research-based ideas from all the different sides. And as a matter of fact, I've been, and so are many researchers, anti-dichotomy. It's not balanced literacy versus SOR, really. We'd be much better off looking at this on a case-by-case, what particular strategies work, what don't. I think that if you stop looking at it through dichotomies and start looking at it from, okay, case by case, how are these different strategies working, that there's an awful lot more common ground out there than people think there are. So first of all, do you think that's even a plausible way of looking at things? And do you have any examples of some things we might all agree on as researchers, educators, and administrators?
First of all, I think it is a plausible way of looking at things, and I think it was established as such very well by John Dewey in his book Experience and Education, published in 1938. It's a short book, about 95 pages maybe, and it's a small book and small pages and lots of white space, so you can read it quickly, but it's Dewey, so you've got to, ruminate over some of his he's a pragmatist philosopher and a functionalist psychologist, but he was the inspiration of progressive education in many ways. And he put forth that what happens is that people get irritated about the less satisfying parts of our status quo, and they forget about all the good and functional things in the status quo. And they overreact and throw out the things they don't like and go the exact opposite way. And then that creates a backlash in the other opposite way. And this is no way to carry on a sane or reasonable argument. It's not so much about finding the golden mean as it is understanding the productive tensions in different points of view. So yes, you can certainly do that. Now, what can we agree on? We can agree on that there are a lot of things that people have different points of view about in education, technically and generally. Mention another philosopher, Richard Rorty. In 1990, a couple of educational philosophers published pieces in the journal Education Theory. And they cited Rorty as the basis for what they were doing. Rorty is a neo-pragmatist American analytic philosopher. And he was invited to respond to their work. And he said, well, I'm not an educator, and education is a domain that requires technical expertise, and I don't have that technical expertise. It would be foolish of me to speak as if I did. I wish some of the folks that are going on about the science of reading, realize that. He said, but he goes, not all questions in education are technical questions. We have public education. The people whose children are in that system have a right to express their opinions about what they would like. And he goes, if you look at the K through 12 system and you look at the post-secondary system, there's an agreement between conservative and liberal sensibilities, namely that education is about truth and freedom. But for the conservatives who dominate in the K through 12 schools, because it's locally controlled and was concerned of caution for welfare of children, so you would just naturally be small c conservative in what you're going to do. So the idea is that you teach them the truth, that is to say, normative social convention, so that they can be free to function within it successfully. When you get on to the post-secondary world, that's dominated by a liberal sensibility, and there you teach them to question and critique normative social convention to free them from it, so that they can know their own particular truth and form it. So these two views are quite productive when they are where they need to be. Whenever teacher education tries to take its liberatory intuitions and force them into K through 12 schools, you get a backlash, as we've recently seen. And whenever the K through 12 sensibility of pushing for normative social convention, very conservative, tries to force itself into the post-secondary domain, the colleges and universities, as unfortunately we're seeing with certain mandates for teacher education, stuff going on in Florida and so forth, there should be a backlash. And thanks to you, Sam, and people like you, there is.
Well, wow. Thank you for that. Although I think there's a lot of folks out there doing a lot of different things, and the backlash, I think, is really growing over time here. So, bottom line, before we end up, did we miss anything really big that you wanted to talk about?
Well, yeah, this is one thing that you asked in an email, and so I'll respond to it. You asked about the Teacher College Press piece that Dave Reinking and Vicky Risco and I wrote, which just came out this year. And one of the things about that is that we actually, looked at, and this isn't new because it happened when it was first published, the National Reading Panel's report on early reading, which came out in 2001. And if you actually read it, it says, what it found was that if you teach kids to read with effective phonics, they do better than if you don't include phonics in their reading instruction. But when they went and measured method to method across all the many methods, not just two methods, whether it's synthetic or analytic or analogical or word-based or multisensory, what they found was that it didn't matter what method you used as long as you taught it, emphatically and well. But what they did was, in the aftermath of that report, some researchers, including a couple who had been on the committee, took everything and compared and averaged it together and compared it to synthetic phonics. And because everything included programs that didn't have any phonics at all, it didn't do, that average was lower than the synthetic phonics. Now that is fraudulent, that's voodoo statistics. And you get a lot of that. Bauer's piece in 2020 that goes through a lot of the subsequent work that tries to extend on the National Reading Panel report that engages in that kind of voodoo. I mean, it could just be clumsy incompetence, but one wonders. It certainly gets played up because it's rhetorically useful. But if you actually understand the designs there, they're not very good. And the replication crisis in psychology, which includes educational psychology, which is the science we're talking about when we talk about the science of reading, the replication crisis ought to be paralyzing. And it's been going on. I mean, this isn't a new thing. The psychology has been struggling with this issue for 20 years. And that's in my video, and I'm kind of chirpy and making a little fun at it because that piece is, but again, I'm not putting people down, and you can see on the screen some of the publications. So if you just go to Google Scholar and type in replication crisis psychology and see what comes up, and you'll see that the issues here are complex. But what it means is that our studies are very underpowered. And as a result, and the factors we're trying to focus on, the method of phonics instruction, is such a small single-digit contribution to the overall calculation of student variance that it can't possibly have a major effect. But so the whole thing is a marketing gimmick. So that's, I'm just going to say that. I'm on a tear this today. You know, I'm being real negative, but I'm a positive guy usually. You know, and I am positive, and I'm sure things are going to work out for the better. Kids are resilient. Teachers are dedicated and resilient. We've been through this before. We went through this. This is those of us who were around at the time recognize it's the same people. Louisa Moats, you know, Chester Finn, the Fordham Institute. They're still at it, right? The same companies, the same programs. And you know, we saw it in the 90s. We saw it in special ed in the 70s and 80s. We saw it in mainstream education in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. We saw it in the 30s. We saw it in the very beginning. I was just reading a piece on the phonics mania that was published in 1916, okay, by Mary Group. So, you know, and it's a serious piece of scholarship from 1916. So these debates have been around a long, long time. And they go, you know, I mean, you could probably trace them back all the way to the Protestant Reformation, you know, reading for chanting versus reading for understanding the Bible, you know, whether, so, you know, it's just, there may be, you know, some people say there's an ideological impetus for all of this. There's certainly a political one, but I just don't get it. I don't quite understand how people could be against kids learning to make meaning from what they read. But when you attack things like the three cueing system, right? The letter sound relationships, phonics, in other words, that's the first cueing system. A grammatical structure, that's the second cueing system, and the meaning of the words, that's the third cueing system. Those are the three elements of a basic dictionary entry. Okay, you look up at a dictionary, you've got correct spelling, next to it in parentheses, the how it's pronounced. So there's your letter sound relationships. Next, in italics and abbreviated, comes the part of speech. Then, enumerated, comes the definitions. Right, so what are we going to do? Ban dictionaries from the schools? This is crazy. This is crazy stuff. But too many legislators and governors, people who don't really understand the psychological research, are being swept up by national policy groups that are promoting this, and for reasons that basically they're promoting a national curriculum. So if you didn't like the Common Core standards, you're really not going to like this.
Okay. Well, as the hat I wear, this hat, I love it. But the hat I wear the most often is that of teacher. That's the one I love to do. And the part that makes me the saddest about all this is what this is doing to many teachers. Under personal attack for doing things, and yet here we have things that are working and they're being banned. You know, it's working. It doesn't matter that it works. It only matters that it fits this very narrow point of view. I don't know how long that can be sustained in the long run, but for the teachers among us that are still active, it is in some ways discouraging. Your information, by the way, is incredibly encouraging. And information is, of course, power, and certainly hope to share some of that information through the blog and the rest. So that all said, I just can't thank you enough. A lot of tremendous information here that we'll try to get out to the readers. And my very last thought, if there just happens to be even one journalist, one newspaper reporter that might be interested in delving into this and finding out why we're spending millions on a program that's not producing results, you know, look up these things and find out, and maybe do some fact checking. So that's a call out to our journalists out there that might be interested in telling a different story than we've heard on social media. Well, that all said, we are now at that final point in a Bomarito interview where, in a Dr. Sam interview, where we do our Zoom wave goodbye. So if you would just raise that hand. And, okay, and thank you again. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Okay, bye-bye.